Hey guys, it's the Conic, and in this one, we are going to be going over my league starter for Legacy of Phrecia, the Vaal Absolution, Architect of Chaos. This is going to come complete with an act-by-act leveling PoB to take you from Act 1 all the way to endgame. Now, as usual, I will be going into as much detail as I can to make this as beginner-friendly as possible. But as a result of that, this will likely be a longer video, so do bear with me. And as an obvious disclaimer, like with other Legacy of Phrecia theory crafts, I have not tested this build in-game, but it should honestly play like other Absolution builds that you can search up just with permanent Vaal Absolution, which would make for a very comfortable playstyle. Because this is going to be a longer video, I'm going to break it up and timestamp it into multiple sections, going over things like Ascendancy choices, item setups, defensive layers, offensive layers, gem setups, Spectre choices, Animate Guardian, config, all those things. So you can easily navigate to what part of the video interests you or backtrack as you need to. If you haven't already, do consider liking and subscribing, as it helps a lot with the algorithm and with hitting our 2025 goal of getting to 2,000 subscribers. A goal that if we hit, I will be revealing my face on stream and on YouTube afterwards. So if that interests you, do consider subscribing. Starting off, I want to talk a bit about Vaal Absolution, what it is, and what kind of playstyle you can expect from this build. Now, Absolution is a spell that hits an enemy and applies a debuff for a very short duration, at typically 1 second base. If the enemy dies while affected by this debuff, an Absolution Sentinel is summoned from its corpse up to a maximum of 3. Then, when you cast Vaal Absolution, one of these Sentinels ascends to basically become Innocence. The Ascended Sentinel has a variety of very high damage spells and very impressive coverage. So it is entirely likely that with a high enough investment, you will only need to refresh Innocence during clear scenarios and not have to summon your regular Absolutions. And thanks to our Ascendancy, we should be able to have permanent uptime on Innocence from the moment we are able to generate 8 souls for his initial summoning. Something very important to note about the way PoB calculates the DPS of Vaal Absolution, or Innocence as I'm going to be referring to him, is that with the number of different skills he uses, PoB ends up being relatively inaccurate at calculating his actual DPS, since it assumes he's doing nothing but casting his cascading Absolution spell. It's ignoring his highest damage spell, which sends a line of shotgunning spells forward in a straight line that deals a ton of damage, especially on bigger enemies that you can get multiple hits in on that same line as the spell travels. So just keep that in mind when looking at the PoB DPS number, that sometimes we're going to actually be doing more damage than it says, but sometimes we are also going to be doing less, as he does waste a fair bit of time casting, I would say, lower DPS spells. Now, for our Ascendancy choices, we are going to be playing a Templar and ascending into an Architect of Chaos during our first lab. And we are also going to be picking up the Depose Order node, which reduces our soul gain prevention duration by 50%. This node alone enables us to have permanent Vaal Absolution uptime if we can generate enough souls quickly enough. Now, I'm not 100% sold that we will be able to refresh him before he expires, and as such, we are going to be taking Forbidden Secrets on our second lab. With Shepherd of Souls, that reduces the soul cost of Vaal Absolution to 8 souls, making it very easy to actually keep him up permanently. Now, we are going to be picking up Impure Blood in our third lab. This is so we spend life instead of mana. When you pair this with Eldritch Battery, it guarantees the Everlasting Sacrifice buff that we got from our second lab is up permanently, giving us +5 to max all res all the time. Then, we're going to be picking up Chaos Reigns as our last and final Ascendancy for the extra damage that 3 gem levels provides. Now, to quickly go over the item section, talking about the very important stats to not miss, we're going to start off with the wand. Here, you want to prioritize the levels. Levels are a big multiplier for most minion skill gems, and Absolution is no exception. So you want to get your +1 all and +1 minions. If you can get increased minion damage and attack speed, good. If you can't, not a deal breaker so long as you have +2. Dawnbreaker, the priority is lightning damage taken as fire. We're going to explain why that is very important in a bit. But for now, just know your priority is lightning damage taken as fire, and then as a secondary, you want as high of a physical damage taken as fire as you can get. Then for the helmet, you're going to want to have a +2 minion helmet. If you can't get +2, that is fine, but ideally you want +2. That will give you a lot of damage. For your chest piece, this is going to be a very big damage multiplier on your build, and it's going to dictate a lot of the choices we have made with this build. Now, what does Doriani's prototype do? This is a chest piece that sets nearby enemies lightning res to yours, but it also makes it so lightning res does not mitigate lightning damage. This effectively means we can go ahead and try to scale down our lightning damage to be as low as possible, so nearby enemies lightning resistance will be that low. But conversely, it also means we have to convert lightning damage taken to other elements so we can actually still mitigate it without just being poofed out of existence. So that being said, that is why we need lightning damage converted as fire in the Dawnbreaker. And I will have a different section where I'll talk about where we're getting up to 100% lightning damage taken as other elements. But for now, that is why we're using Doriani's prototype. Next up, for the gloves, you have no real prior, just get life and res. If you can get minion damage, good. If you can't, that is fine. Boots, you want to prioritize movement speed and crafting with chance to avoid shock. You want to get a total of 100% chance to avoid shock, because that paired with Storm Shroud means we are going to be immune to all elemental ailments. That includes freeze, ignite, brittle, all elemental ailments. So that is your priority for boots. Then we're going for replica Dragon Fang with level of all absolution. Then for the ring, you just want ideally negative lightning res on a bone ring. The reason you want a bone ring is so you can get minion res for your permanent minions. But minions deal increased damage is a nice bonus. Minions have attack speed, also a nice bonus, but they are by far no means necessary. Your onset ring, same thing, negative res. You just want an onset ring so you can have an extra socket, because this build is very socket intensive. And then Darkness Enthroned with 2 Ghastly Eye Jewels that have flat lightning and chance to taunt. As a bonus, you probably want to get one of them with Corrupted Blood immunity, and you can kind of lowball the other stats to fit it so you can afford a Corrupted Blood immunity jewel. Now, to talk a bit about the defensive layers this build employs to give you as smooth of an experience as possible. We're going to be going over as many as I can think of right now. So the first and most obvious is 85% max res, and you might wonder how we get that. Well, we're employing a number of different ways, but firstly, Everlasting Sacrifice, which is provided by the Ascendancy, just gives us 5% max res so long as we can fill up our energy shield every 4 seconds. Now, how do we make sure our ES fills up every 4 seconds while it is being sacrificed every time it does? We are using Divine Flesh, which gives us +5 to max chaos res to make sure all damage bypasses ES. Now, by making sure all damage bypasses, ES recharge is never stopped, and as such, it will be filled up every 3 seconds, give or take, giving us permanent uptime on Everlasting Sacrifice. Now that puts us at 85% max chaos res, but like that's still just 80% max fire and cold res. For the remaining 5%, we are getting Vaal Impurity of Fire and Vaal Impurity of Ice. The reason we have opted for the Vaal versions of these skills is because of Chaos Rain's Ascendancy node. That will provide these skills a free 3 extra levels, which gives us 1 more extra max res. Now, it is going to slow down the rate at which we get souls for Vaal Absolution, but that is a fair price to pay, and it shouldn't really affect the uptime on Vaal Absolution anyways. The next and second most important defensive layer we have at our disposal is actually converting the lightning damage we're taking from lightning into other resistances so that it is still met by resistances instead of trying to mitigate it with armor. Now, it is important to note there's a difference between dots and hits, because many modifiers that convert lightning damage taken only convert hits. So we're only looking for those that are generic conversion of damage taken. Now, how do we get to 100%? We are using Divine Flesh for 50% elemental taken as chaos. Now this is now we're at a total of 50% lightning taken as other elements. Then we have our Dawnbreaker, which converts 20% of lightning damage taken as fire. This puts us at 70% total. Then the remaining 30% we're getting from our Watcher's Eye. Now, it is important you do not exceed 100% damage taken as, otherwise we are actually going to be taking more damage. So for this one, we are using a 15% cold and lightning damage taken as fire while we have Purity of Fire, and then 15% fire and lightning damage as taken as cold while affected by Purity of Ice. This converts 15% of lightning damage to fire and 15% to cold, taking care of the remaining 30% that we were missing. Now, if I had a better roll on the Watcher's Eye, like let's say an 18-15, I would have to make sure my Dawnbreaker was 3 less to make sure we do not cross that 100% lightning damage taken as other elements, just so we do not take more damage. We are also using block from Tempest Shield and other sources on the tree to make sure we are not going to be taking every single hit as damage, to just give us that extra bit of effective hit pool. Auras we are using include Tempest Shield for spell block chance, Vaal Impurity of Fire and Vaal Impurity of Ice for max fire res and cold res, just to mitigate even more elemental res. With elemental damage taken care of, we still have to worry about physical damage because our max res isn't helping us too much against physical damage. Now, how do we go about combating physical damage? We are converting 20% to fire damage between our shield and our helmet. We are using a Chaos Golem, which has some buff effect scaling coming from the tree to give us about 10% PDR, give or take. We also have picked a Glorious Vanity that gives us Automaton Studies on 2 nodes, giving us even more PDR. Then we're also going for 4 Endurance Charges, giving us 16% PDR. And we also have our Pantheon, giving us PDR with each enemy that's around us and for every time we've been hit recently. We also kind of scale armor by just going for armor pieces, but we have armor as an afterthought to just reduce whatever amount it can, basically. Then we have Immutable Force, and I believe it needs a roll of 961% for us to not feel the stun animation and not have to worry about stuns ever again. Then once we have this, we also have Rational Doctrine, which makes it so we get Consecrated Ground whenever we are stationary, and Strength is our highest attribute. Now, this is really not too hard if you get Strength on gear, but it also just means you have to tattoo out a lot of Strength nodes, or Intelligence nodes rather, to make sure your Strength can pass it without investing much on gear. Now, just keep in mind that even before you're able to afford all these anti-crit tattoos, you could get cheaper tattoos just to fill it out, then replace it as time goes on. Then on the topic of Rational Doctrine, it also has the effect of having Consecrated Grounds you create linger for 4 seconds. This means so long as you stand still doing anything, including casting a spell like Absolution, your curse, Frostblink, whatever it is, so long as you stand still for a split second, you will have Conk Grounds regen for 4 seconds. And on the topic of regen, you'll see we have a very healthy amount of regen coming from the Conk Ground that we should typically be on, as well as Stone Golem giving us a healthy chunk of regen, and then some few nodes on the tree like this and this giving us some extra life regen as well. And then a very quick mention to Storm Shroud, which paired with our boots gives us ailment immunity. But that about covers it for defenses we're using on this build. Next up, let's talk a bit about how we scale the damage of this build. Now, like I said earlier, we set our enemies' lightning res to our lightning res, so a big multiplier to our damage is just being able to get negative lightning res from any source, including our rings or Thread of Hope or whatever else. We are not using a Thread of Hope, but we are also trying to avoid nodes like Pro Preparation, which gives us some early res, which would typically not be bad, but because we do not want that lightning res bit, we are actively avoiding this node as an example. Then we also have our Phase to Lightning support to really help us take advantage of the negative lightning res multiplier by converting the rest of Absolution's damage to lightning, because base Absolution actually only converts 50% of Phase to lightning damage. Then we also have levels as a very big multiplier. You would see that we have plus to 11 levels of Absolution. This is coming from our wand, it's coming from our amulet, it's coming from our Ascendancy. We have many different sources giving us plus 2 levels. It is very important we have this. Then, because of how spiky lightning damage tends to be with having a low minimum hit and a very high maximum hit, so lightning damage can feel very awkward. To help with this, we're actually using lucky lightning hits coming from a Spectre called the Perfect Spirit of Fortune. This makes it so whenever any of your lightning based minions, or I guess minions, hits, what would happen is the game would roll twice on the damage number and then pick the highest number. This essentially means that you have a very big damage multiplier coming from there, just because of the shared roll range that lightning damage tends to have. Now, other ways to improve our damage includes having curses. Now, because of our Doriani, we can't actually reduce the res of the enemies. So we are opting for punishment, which would increase the amount of damage they take when they are on low life. Now this is also set in our config, and I'll go over it in a bit. We also have certain auras affecting our damage. As an example, we have Zealotry as a big damage multiplier. Wrath would probably have been a better damage multiplier. However, we are already getting some level of Wrath coming from our Spectres, so we can opt in to then have Zealotry for the more spell damage. Now keep in mind, the crit does nothing for us because we are using control destruction on our Absolution, but the more spell damage is that impactful to where it still outperforms Wrath in this scenario. Now the last but not the least when it comes to scaling minion damage is actually scaling minion AoE. Now the reason minion AoE is important, coming from this mastery and coming from increased AoE support or awakened increased AoE support, is because Vaal Absolution, his default attack or spell rather, is a spell that cascades, which means it repeats itself in front of the target, to the sides and behind. By having more of an AoE, you're able to overlap this cascade against smaller and smaller enemies. So we are trying to get as much AoE as we can, so we have as much overlap as we can. And not only that, he has some other AoE spells that would just do more damage to smaller targets the more AoE it has. But of course, PoB has no way to directly calculate how much of an increase how much of an increase of overlap this AoE is. So just having it there, just know at the back of your mind that it's going to give you a ton of damage. Now for a quick look at all the Spectres and what they provide for this build, we're going to be using 4 Spectres as our maximum once we get to our gem level to our Spectre gem level to 25. These Spectres are the Perfect Warlord, which is going to be a source of endurance charges as well as a vitality aura for you and your minions. We're also using the Perfect Spirit of Fortune, which we have talked about before. It's going to give us lucky lightning damage as well as a Wrath aura. We have the Perfect Blasphemer. This guy is going to give us smite and triple curses. I believe one of them is Enfeeble, which also increases our defenses, which is kind of just really nice, or reduces damage we take. But just keep in mind, these auras are not always going to be up. They kind of have poor AoE and they move around a lot, and you can't really predict where they'll go. So whenever it's up, it's a nice defense upgrade, but whenever it's not, it's whatever. Then we have the Perfect Forest Warrior, which is providing onslaught and calling strike to us. Now for everybody's favorite section, the Animate Guardian. To go over the Animate Guardian's gear very quickly, we are using a Mask of the Stitch Demon to convert energy shield to life regen, paired with Grave Intentions on our Anoint would give him a whole bunch of regen to give him a whole bunch of sustain. And of course, we also give him a lot of regen through renewal and other sources. So he has a bunch of regen. Then we have him with an Explode Chest, which is a Crusader elevated, well, it's a Crusader mod. We elevate it to have even higher chance to explode, but he only has the chance on his kill. So we have to make sure he is killing. We also have an Explode Sword for the same thing. He has to kill to get the chance to explode, but whenever they do explode, it gives us a whole bunch of clear. How do we get him to kill? Gravebind. This makes it so any kill in his vicinity is counted as him. With that, we also use a Victorious Charity to give him a chance to grant power charges to all nearby allies on kill and Frenzy Charge on hit. Now it is important to note his explosions count as him hitting, and so during clear and whatnot, he'll have we should have permanent frenzy and power charges. Now on single target, power charges might not be a thing unless the enemy has adds, but frenzy charges should still be a thing because he is going to be hitting quite a bit. Then we have Legacy of Fury, not because the Scorch does anything, but because they are barely better boots and it's just even more explode damage, so why not? Not to mention, it also makes the explode look kind of nice. And now for the final section, the config, because I like to be as transparent as I can with my choices on the configuration. So like I said before, we're going for Souls of Lunaris and Grotcall. This gives us PDR whenever we are hit and with how many enemies are around. We currently have only set it to one nearby enemy because I'm simulating for a boss fight. Now, number of times we've been hit, we get even more PDR the more times we've been hit, but we probably don't want to get hit more than once if we have the choice, so I just put 1 in here. We can also put 0. It doesn't change much, as you'll see. It doesn't change too much. We use frenzy charges, which we get from our AG. We also can use power charges, but it's not there for single targets. Like I said, power charges are not there, but frenzy are there Endurance charges are from our Spectre, the Perfect Warlord. Conk Ground is from Rational Doctrine, giving us Conk Ground while we are stationary. We've been hit recently. We're going to be using Convocate often, so this is a no-brainer. We have Corpses nearby from Desecrate, though they explode. It doesn't really matter too much. It doesn't change any statistics. Everlasting Sacrifice, we already have talked about getting to 100% uptime on this. Feeding Frenzy is coming from our golems, I believe. We have this golem giving us Feeding Frenzy, yes. And then we have our Ray Spectre with buffs and curses. Enemies debilitated because we use punishments. If we cannot take this because it would balloon our DPS in a very inflated way. And then shock, I do not know how much shock we're going to have. I suspect it's going to be much higher than 15, but I'm just using 15 to be safe. And then unnerve we are getting from awakened controlled destruction, giving us a 10% chance to unnerve on hit. Then for the actual custom modifiers, we have Minion Taunt coming from our Ghastly Eye Jewels, giving our Spectres, AG, who else? Spectre, AG, Golems, all chance to taunt whenever they hit, and whenever they do taunt, enemies will deal 10% less damage. Then we have Calling Strike coming from Perfect Warrior. Punishment is simple. It's giving us on average 24% increased damage. This is calculated to take into account Calling Strike as well, so that is why it's as low as it is. And then we have our Ascendancy nodes. Pretty straightforward stuff. Now, like I said at the start of the video, we do have an act by act leveling PoB that should get you to from campaign all the way to act 10. Then you would switch to the low budget PoB. So now, just to talk a bit about the leveling PoB, whenever something is red, it just means that by the next section, you will probably drop it. In this case, for example, we get Rolling Magma level 1 when we get into town for the first time, but we're going to drop it once we get our SRS. And then once we have SRS with only Elemental Prolif, we're going to drop this with once we get Melee Splash. We're going to keep using Holy Flame Totem here, but by this changes, it kind of refers to when you've done most of the quests in the act, you should be ready to use the changes here. In this case, we're going to be dropping Holy Flame Totem after the act is done, pretty much when we don't need the damage anymore. And it just goes on this way. If it's green, you're going to keep probably using it maybe to a different degree if it shows up here, because like Raise Zombie is here, but it's here because we add another link in Act 2 if we can, and so on, so forth. Absolution is here, but then we change some of the links. So that is the general theme we have, and then we have the notes to take for the ascendancies in here and the acts that they should be there. But yeah, like I said, once you're done with the leveling PoB, and again, do remember it does have different trees for different acts. Once you're done with this, you would then move on to the low budget PoB, which looks something like this. It has less cluster jewels. It doesn't really have like any uniques. It's really taking budget gear. This is basically gear you should have by, let's say, while you're getting into red maps. It's mostly just life and res, life and res, life and res, and then all the Eldritch implicits are tier 1, like they're the lowest tier of Eldritch implicits, just so you can have something basically. But yeah, that about covers the other budgets. There are quite a few changes in the gem setup, but I will leave as many notes as I can to make the transition seamless. And I will be making one more version, which will be mid-budget, which should kind of bridge going from this PoB to the high budget we talked about for the majority of this video. Overall, I am very happy with the build and cannot wait to league started on Thursday. Leave a comment down below on what you think of the build. Let me know if you would like a video dedicated to covering the progression from Act to high budget in more detail, as I couldn't really do it in order to not let this video go on too long. And if there is enough interest in that, I will make a follow-up video before league starts going over just that. If you made it this far, do consider liking and subscribing, as it helps a lot with the channel. And with all that said, thank you for watching.